Everything that human beings have ever accomplished is a product of the machinery inside our heads. This is the size of the human brain, the organ of the mind of man. It generates all our feelings, our actions, our thoughts. There are new ideas about how it works, about waking and dreaming, about our emotions and the strange partnership of mind and body, about how we see and how we remember, even where consciousness operates within the brain. So tonight, we'll examine that imprecise quality, human nature, and search for the powers within this lump of tissue. I'm David Prowett of National Educational Television. The life of the mind is still deeply mysterious, and some of the distinguished contributors to this program will dispute the approach we've chosen. But it leads us, at the very least, to remarkable new discoveries about the mind of man. Our search begins here in London and will take us around the world, not only to Western Europe, the United States, and the Soviet Union, but to India too, where the yogis say they can exert amazing mental control over their bodies during meditation. In New Delhi, we begin our first experiment. Ramanand is one of India's most accomplished Raj, or master yogis. Allegedly, he was once buried alive for 28 days. Using this airtight metal box, Dr. China and his colleagues at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences are going to put the yogi's powers to a severe test. Before he's sealed inside, Ramanand Yogi prays. He's 46 years old, and he's practiced yoga for nearly 30 years. Dr. Bal Krishan Anand is in charge of the laboratory. He's already proved some claims of the yogis, such as the ability to stop the heart, to be false. The question now is, could other claims be true? Is it possible for a man to control his body's need for oxygen just by the power of thought? These wires will measure electric rhythms in Ramanand Yogi's head. They'll be the main guide to this state of mind during this remarkable experiment. And for recording the yogi's rate of breathing, this tube. One problem Ramanand faces is the suffocating effect of carbon dioxide, which will build up as he breathes the air inside the box. An untrained man would be fighting for breath within a short time.
Andar chaliye. Chaliye andar.
Twice an hour, small samples of air drawn from the top of the box will show how much oxygen the yogi has used. The doctors have already calculated his body's basic needs at complete rest. These leads from head and body will inform the experimenters instantly about his condition. But in case Ramanand wants to be released in a hurry, he has an emergency alarm buzzer.
योगी जी जब ये बटन दबाएगा बाहर आवाज आएगा तो उससे हम आपका बक्स खोल देगा इसकी आवाज ऐसे आएगा तो इसको ऐसे दबाना है
ये ऐसा दबाना चाहिए
हाँ ऐसे दबाना है और जब हमें आवाज आएगा तो हम आपको खोल देंगे
Everything's ready now for the box to be sealed.
I want to get started.
Now the yogi's brain must repress the demands of his body. No air can seep in here as it did through the dirt when Ramanand was buried underground. The dancing pens report the yogi's condition. There's no outward sign of the battle that's beginning between mind and body. The heart beats steadily. These unusually rhythmic waves on the electroencephalograph show that the yogi's brain is very peaceful indeed. What will the result be of Ramanan's strange journey into the depths of his being? We'll go back to Delhi later to find out and to see what it means for those of us who aren't yogis. Because you at home are the real heroes of our story as owners of this machine. It's inconceivably more complex than the mightiest computer, yet it weighs only 3 pounds and it fits snugly into your skull. It's the most subtle of all the works of nature, an end product of billions of years of evolution. The brain doesn't work in isolation. It's both servant and master of our bodies. Every experience, every sensory impression, every thought we've ever had, every second of every minute of every day has left its influence. It inherits 50,000 years of human progress and tradition. The brain itself has not changed since our forefathers lived in caves. The armchair psychologist could miss important features of his mind if he forgets it evolved for practical action. This mind machine supplied the hunter's skills of hand and eye, his quick wits, and the communal bonds of emotion and language. But the dreamy hunter turned out to be capable of much else besides, and his powerful brain changed the natural world to suit itself. As we saw in those rhythms from the yogi's scalp, the human brain is an electrical machine. Inside my head, billions of nerve-like living cells are carrying a chatter of electrical impulses through a vast forest of connections. Many communicate with the outside world, but most of them talk to one another. Messages passing from one brain cell to another have to jump a narrow gap between them. The electrical impulses release special chemicals, transmitter substances. Traveling across the gap, they stimulate the brain cell on the far side. That means the brain is a chemical machine too. How can we connect that microscopic bustle with our conscious minds? One obvious fact is that sometimes we're awake and sometimes we're asleep. For sleeping and waking, and for dreaming too, switches have now been located here in the stem of the brain. They're among the first parts of the brain to start working. This crown of electrodes will draw a picture of the first tentative flickers of a young mind in the making. Little Delphine is a premature baby, being cared for at the Port Royal Hospital in Paris. Officially, Delphine is 4 weeks old, but she was born about 9 weeks too early. She weighed only 3.5 pounds. Even now, her brain's not as ready for life as the brains of most babies are at birth.
Bouche, les mots, pieds, mains, tête, deux mains.
Physicians now have to find out the baby's true stage of development so she can receive the right care. Her brain rhythms give clues about that to neonatal research specialists Nicole Monod and Colette Dreyfus-Brissac. It was Dr. Dreyfus-Brissac who discovered the telltale changes in brain rhythms of premature babies, indicating their true ages since conception. This baby is already old enough to show the typical pattern of quiet sleep. Now a change. Look closely. Under her closed lids, Delphine's eyes are flicking back and forth. This is called REM, rapid eye movement, and her brain reflects this normal state of sleep by beating out a different rhythm. This active sleep is the first state of sleep that's recognizable in premature babies. We know that during active sleep, older people have vivid dreams, but who can imagine what's going on in this young mind? Adults begin their sleep in the quiet state, then move to active. Babies start with active sleep, then spend more than half their time in it. The machine monitors her eye movements. 5 weeks before normal birth, many parts of a baby's brain are still unconnected. Delphine's world is small, her senses still vague and indistinct. But her brain's electric rhythms show that the switches of sleeping and waking have begun operating, switches that involve chemicals at work in the brain. At Göteborg University in Sweden, Annika Dahlström examines specially treated tissue from the brain of a rat. Chemicals called transmitter substances glow like fluorescent paint in ultraviolet light. Professor Dahlstrom's discovered that the little containers for the chemicals have to travel to work.
With this technique, we can study the action of the transmitter substances within nerve cells. Now, these substances are specially designed to transfer messages from one nerve cell to another in all parts of the body, including the brain. Now, in order to be able to carry messages, these transmitter substances must be stored in special small particles called transmitter granules. In this preparation, we can see a bundle of nerve fibers from a rat. A thread was tied around this bundle at the dark area to the right. The transmitter granules could not pass this constricted area and are therefore jammed in huge numbers like cars at traffic lights. This preparation shows the nerve endings in the eye of a rat. The transmitter substance is located in the small bags which look like strings of brightly fluorescent pearls.
At the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Dr. Kjell Fuchse uses the same research technique to see how drugs work. These are brain cells in a normal rat, with the colored transmitter substance gathered inside them. But if a rat's had a dose of a stimulant like amphetamine, the whole area is washed with transmitter substance, which is leaked out of the cells. This is how amphetamine attacks the brain, by overstimulating it. Here's another section of normal brain tissue, showing typical weak fluorescence, and here's the effect of LSD, a drug that's particularly damaging to reason. The brain bottles up the transmitter substance in an effort to protect itself, according to Dr. Fuchse. But even so, it can't escape the madness produced by LSD triggering certain brain cells. The natural transmitters have drug-like influences themselves, as shown by research on sleep at Lyon in France. This is Dr. Michel Jouvet.
Well, like most hunting animals, cats sleep a great deal. And usually at midday in Europe, cats sleep and dream. Here is a typical pose of a sleeping cat. But this one, as you can see, is very wide awake. We have given both of these cats a big dose of amphetamine, a pep drug. This one won't sleep for 12 hours.
But this cat does sleep, because 6 hours earlier, another drug cut the supply of the transmitter substance, noradrenaline, nature's own pep drug. This indicates that amphetamine can only stimulate when it's working with the natural substance. Studies of waking and sleeping in cats have located the switches of consciousness in the brain. About 20 years ago, American and Italian scientists discovered that a special network of cells in the stem of the brain has the job of arousing the brain as a whole, turning us on, if you will. Also in the brain stem, as Professor Jouvet has found, another switch must be thrown if we're to sleep. The switch for dreaming is in the same area.
We have found a trigger zone just around here in the brain, which is responsible for dreaming and which is also responsible for the mechanism which stop us acting out our dreams. Now we know that cats are dreaming just by sticking 2 electrodes here to record the rapid eye movement, which usually are corresponding with dreaming.
We'll put that there. It'll pick up your rapid eye movements during your dreams. Just stick it down.
At Edinburgh University, Ian Oswald investigates dreaming with the help of volunteers like Joanna.
18.
Why our brain should tell strange stories while we sleep is still unexplained. But the detection of rapid eye movements is dispelling some of the mystery.
Good. Well, good night. Sleep well. I hope that arm of yours doesn't give you any trouble. Good night.
You'll be all right. Good night.
Joanna broke her arm in a cycling accident today, and although she's a regular volunteer in this research, it's still not easy to drop off to sleep with wires on your head, connected to a recorder, and the experimenter keeping watch. The machine that records Joanna's brain rhythms and eye movements will use more than 1/4 of a mile of paper before morning. Mental life goes on all through the night. Joanna's passing into her first hour of quiet sleep, a time for the repair of the body. If you're a specialist in sleep research, you lose a lot of sleep yourself. At last, the strong, slow brain rhythms of quiet sleep give way to faster activity associated with dreaming. The eyes begin to jerk about rapidly. Joanna is now dreaming. Every healthy adult dreams for about 2 hours each night. Most of us just don't remember it. The recorder is a surer guide. During active sleep, we're also sexually excited. Babies have a great deal of this active sleep, and Dr. Oswald believes a child's brain is growing during these periods, while an adult's is repairing itself. Joanna should be well into her dreaming by now. Joanna, wake up.
Wake up.
Have you been dreaming?
Someone was talking to me just before I woke up, but before that, I was thinking about an old district in Edinburgh which was suddenly becoming named public place because everybody could go there and talk about anything they liked, and therefore it was at the service of the public. And then these two strange beings arrived looking like pirates and smashed two bicycles together and were sort of dancing up and down on the bicycles, and a crowd of people were watching and telling themselves seriously that they were being educated by pushing this.
Joanna dreamed of bicycles after crashing on one herself. But why of pirates? Our nighttime creativity defies explanation so far. But it turns out that dreams are most vivid at particular times. For instance, in women just before menstruation, and in people giving up sleeping pills. The brain's more democratic than experts used to think. The brain stem, down here, is a channel selector and volume control for all these executive regions on top. We've also heard about chemical influences on the brain by natural transmitters and by drugs. Of course, alcohol and other traditional drugs told of a chemical factor in mental life long before the potent new drugs appeared. But seeing how amphetamine and LSD attack brain cells to produce states resembling insanity may help to dispel any glamour that remains in taking them for kicks. Some of the mind drugs are very valuable in psychiatric hospitals, but their abuse by healthy people is terrifying. As researchers find out more about how the drugs work, antidepressants, stimulants, tranquilizers, psychedelic drugs, we can expect to see ever more potent and specific agents. So if we don't lick the problem of abuse quickly, it may get past solution. People could become chemical automatons, changing their moods with a chest full of pills. Memory. That's what we turn to next, a most important ingredient of the human mind, but not easily accounted for. The Montreal Neurological Institute in Canada is a famous hospital where surgeons often have to remove diseased parts of the brain. This is the right-hand side of a living human brain exposed during an operation for epilepsy. The patient stays awake and reports his feelings while an electric probe explores the brain surface. The surgeon can then cut out large portions of brain tissue without harming the patient's memory or mental powers. Memories are somehow scattered and repeated in the brain. But you have to be careful. Two regions under the side of the brain turn out to be essential for laying down new memories. In one grim case in the United States, a surgeon interfered with both these regions in a young epileptic. The man concerned can remember almost nothing that's happened to him since then for more than a few minutes, the span of what's called the short-term memory. In the normal brain, learned information passes from that short-term memory into the more permanent record of long-term memory. It takes an hour or more to consolidate it. During that time, items of information like the name and face of someone you've just met somehow change the very fabric of the brain, so you'll recognize him in the future. How does it happen? That's one of the most basic questions you can ask about the machinery of the mind. The commonest opinion among the experts is that learning and memory depend on changing or reinforcing particular connections between brain cells. The lasting importance of nerve connections appear in a situation which shows resistance to learning, as we'll see in a short piece of laboratory film. It's from Roger Sperry of the California Institute of Technology. A tadpole had pieces of skin on its back exchanged left to right and right to left. Now the frog's grown up. When he's tickled on the right, he scratches himself on the left. But if he's tickled where the skin's not been crossed, he scratches the correct side. From the lower piece of skin, the nerves are still saying left side. Some process in the growing frog made sure that the nerve connections with the brain corresponded to the original positions of the skin. There must be some kind of chemical tag on the nerves. Does another kind of tagging allow for altering connections during learning? The search is on for chemicals involved in the learning process.
This rat is right-handed. It's clear which paw he uses given a free choice. But he's going to learn to use his left paw. Here at the University of Göteborg in Sweden, they've used this procedure many times to find out what chemical changes take place in the brain during learning. Now the rat can reach the food pellets only with the left paw. He has quite a difficult task, like that of a right-handed human trying to write with his left hand. But after a few periods of practice, the art is mastered. The use of the left paw has been learned. Dr. Holger Hidén on the left here and his colleague, Dr. Paul Lange, developed special techniques for finding the chemical changes that took place in the rat's brain during learning. Their work focuses on the region of the brain which is the first to be engaged when the rat's learning to change paws. It's one of the regions that's known to be essential for memory, the hippocampus. For this training session, the rat's been given an injection of a radioactive chemical. Now, protein forming in his brain will itself become radioactive. And that's the key to this extremely delicate analysis. In this tube is material from about 200 cells from that particular region of the rat's brain. There's less than 1/1,000,000th of a gram, the weight of a gas bubble in a glass of soda water. The brain material is transferred to another tube containing a special jelly. The material will now be electrically drawn into the preparation. Since different kinds of protein molecules in the brain material travel into the jelly at different speeds, they'll now be strung out like runners in a very slow race. After 10 minutes, the jelly is eased carefully out of the tube. Then it goes into a stain, which will make the proteins visible. Bands in the jelly represent the different kinds of protein extracted from the rat's brain cells. This instrument measures the darkness of each band and gives an indication of the amount of protein in it. Eventually, each protein type finishes up in a sensitive Geiger counter. Its radioactivity will tell how much of it was formed during that last training session. The experiments in Dr. Hidén's laboratory suggest that the learning brain makes extra amounts of a particular protein. These 3 bands are proteins from brain cells of an untrained rat. From the cells of a trained rat, 4 bands. The extra band and the one near it are forms of a brain protein called S100. According to Dr. Hidén, they were made during the learning period. The real meaning of this discovery is still controversial, but in California, a leading investigator gives his views, Dr. Samuel Barandez.
All cells do jobs as individuals. The special problem for nerve cells is to work together, to communicate with each other. Now, the way that nerve cells learn to form communications and pathways, we believe is due to protein substances on their surface. The experiments with frog skin show that certain of these connections or pathways are inborn and unchangeable. Other nerve cells, we believe, have the option of forming new relationships or strengthening other relationships during the course of adult life. We believe that this change in relationships also requires protein. Now, the work that Hidane and Lange are doing is an attempt to find proteins which are made during learning. In our own work on inhibitors of protein synthesis in nerve cells, we find that when you block the making of proteins in nerve cells during learning, long-term memory is markedly impaired. Now, the major point of all this work is that we're beginning to think of nerve cells and the nervous system not only as a box full of electrical components, but as a bunch of blobs of protoplasm which make use of common mechanisms, the making of protein for one, for a very special purpose, to communicate with each other.
We're going to listen in on a cell engaged in communication. At the State University of New York in Buffalo, scientists are exploring a part of the brain which learns, then controls complex physical movements. Their research is also helping to solve the mystery of memory. This tube of glass is about to become a delicate instrument fit for eavesdropping on brain cells. The fine tip of that tube slides gently into the brain of an unconscious cat. Bearing an electric conductor, it eases through the dense forest of living cells. This microelectrode, as it's called, can distinguish the electrical pulses of a single cell, the chatter of one individual in the vast population of the brain. In this small room, shielded from all outside electrical interference, an international expedition into the darkest continent of all, the living brain, is in progress. It's led by Sir John Eccles, a Nobel Prize winner and perhaps the most experienced brain researcher of our time. His wife and colleague, Helena Taborshikova, comes from Czechoslovakia. Another member of the team is from Japan. Professor Eccles himself is from Australia. Specialists from the United States and Lebanon complete the team.
Now we're losing it a bit. I think we're moving away. Could you try now, Helena, to go a little up or down and see if we can lift it again up to where we had it?
Each movement is just 0.02 of a millimeter, about a 50th of the thickness of a human hair.
Yes, there's the pulse coming up now. That should be climbing fibers, I think, shouldn't it? How much latency? Just a bit too.
The microelectrode is searching for one of the main cells in the cerebellum, a special part of the brain that controls learned movement.
Oh, here. Here she is.
The cerebellum's job is to coordinate skilled movements of the muscles. It gathers information from all over the body. The experimenters now want to see how this particular cell is influenced by nerve signals coming up from the cat's leg.
And what nerve is that you've got on?
This is superficial radio.
Try it on deep, will you, John?
Here we are. There's the deep.
Yes, it's not the climbing fiber. There's good inhibition now. I think if we added that up, we'd see quite a good inhibition.
Sensitive electronic equipment is used to find the pattern of the apparently capricious activity of the cell. The effects of repeated signals from the leg are added up and show that the incoming signals briefly suppress the activity of the cell in the cerebellum. Here, that brief silence is shown differently by a flattening effect. In brain signals, silence can be a message too.
Don, can you make that sweep faster now so it's easier to integrate it? Yeah, that's better.
Dr. Eccles and his team may spend several hours with one cell until they know it thoroughly. Every cell has its own peculiarities. This particular one is one of the output cells of the cerebellum, which sends instructions to the muscles during a skilled movement.
That's a very nice cell indeed.
Dr. Eccles and other investigators have drawn the first detailed wiring diagrams of part of the brain. In the cerebellum, a pattern of cells is repeated many times. A British theorist, David Marr, has suggested how this living machine learns to control skilled movements. Each of these big output cells controls one specific movement, in this case turning the wrist. We'll see how the massive nearby cells help teach it when to operate. This child, learning to drink from a cup, has to think what she's doing. What next? The cerebellum receives signals that the cup has touched the lip. Special cells broadcast the news. But watch on the left, too, for word of the decision of the conscious brain to turn the wrist. Any broadcasting cells that are active now strengthen their links with the output cell as it echoes the command. Meanwhile, the action continues under conscious control. The cerebellum hasn't yet learned to take charge automatically. The output cell must learn its job with practice. The same action and the same news is broadcast by the same combination of cells. Prompting from the conscious brain is still needed. Turn the wrist now. But it makes those links stronger still. Again, the action proceeds under conscious control. After enough practice, the cerebellum is ready to take charge itself. The news of cup-touching lip, broadcast by the same set of cells, turns the wrist without any conscious decision because the links are now sufficiently strong. Turn the wrist now. The order goes out to the muscles and the cerebellum has learned another skilled movement. Many circuits like this take part in drinking from a cup, and one circuit can be needed in hundreds of different actions. It can learn to respond to news of other situations. For example, the wrist has also to turn when we strike a match. Now, a different pattern of signals will trigger the same action. In a most economical way, one group of cells stores information about many different tasks. The same principles may well serve in other parts of the brain for learning and remembering using comparable circuits of cells. But that isn't the whole story about the control of movement.
The simple action of raising a coffee cup to my mouth involves two amazing things. Firstly, there is the machinery, the muscles, the thousands of nerve fibers, the millions of nerve cells that are concerned. Then there are the complex interacting circuits by which the cerebellum takes over all of this and gives me the smoothness of operation as when I put my cup to my mouth. The second amazing thing is the will. How by taking thought I can carry out any action that I please. If anybody tells you how that happens, don't believe him. We still are completely ignorant of the way in which mind controls the operations of nerve cells. It is very humbling indeed for a biologist to be faced up with the problem of how a human mind can control movement in the beautiful and subtle way that you now see.
That was Maria Krejčířová from Czechoslovakia. The question of how the brain learns was baffling only a few years ago. We've seen that it's gradually yielding to new discoveries. The regions essential for implanting long-term memory, the way the same regions in a rat make special proteins during learning, and how the cells in another part of the brain remember past activities by strengthening their mutual connections. But the brain might not bother to learn anything if it didn't have motives for doing so. Emotion colors all human life. Love and lust, appetite and ambition, fear, mirth, aggressiveness, these are products of the living brain, especially of its central regions. And here, the brain's strongly coupled with the body. Excitement makes the heart beat faster. Hunger or high blood pressure can make a man irritable. Emotions are sometimes vicious and disabling. Rage can be blind and fear petrifying. But milder arousal is necessary for any practical action, and emotions can be strong, yet tender. Before looking again into brain mechanisms, let's see some outward effects of emotion in young animals.
When there are monsters around, this young monkey clings to his mother. He was reared as an orphan, and this cloth-covered stand took the place of his natural mother. He clearly prefers it to the more lifelike doll in the same cage. At the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Harry Harlow has spent many years finding out how the capacity for love and friendship develops in young monkeys. These youngsters have grown up with cloth mothers, but they're accustomed to playing with other monkeys of the same age. Psychologists often say that boys and girls learn their differences in behavior from adults, but Dr. Harlow finds the differences are inborn. Young monkeys who've never met an adult play in characteristic style according to sex. These are young males. Young females simply don't wrestle like this. For this young monkey, even a cloth mother means nothing. He's lived up till now in complete isolation, with only himself to hug. At present, he's emotionally devastated. For another deprived monkey, rocking provides self-comfort. These monkeys, reared on their own, have, so far, no idea of how to play. Their new companions will show them what to do, and they'll slowly recover. If the isolation had continued much longer, they'd never develop affection for any other monkey. Learning to love is a serious business, and in monkeys, Dr. Harlow sees striking parallels with human behavior. The parallels between behavior in monkeys and man are brought even closer in another experiment in progress at Wisconsin. In the wild state, monkey fathers take little interest in their mates and offspring. Here, these monkeys are made to live like human families in a group of cages resembling an apartment house. This experiment is the work of Dr. Harlow's wife and collaborator, Margaret Harlow. The normally promiscuous male adults have to stay with their mates because the front door is too small for them to leave. But the youngsters are free to play together in the yard. So, the fathers just have to make the best of their enforced domesticity. In more normal circumstances, it's rare to see an adult male minding the baby. Here, it happens. As with humans, the neighbors have their little disputes. The psychologists at the University of Wisconsin who arranged this unnatural kind of life with father are surprised at how well all the monkeys have adapted to it. The basic human family of father, mother, and children may not be as strange an arrangement as some people think. The young monkeys in particular seem to benefit from the family grouping. According to Mrs. Harlow, they're the most self-confident youngsters she ever observed. How does the brain generate our impulses and emotions? At Stanford University in California, Dr. Seymour Levine tackles part of the question.
Most of you will agree that sex is a unique creation of nature. But it may not have struck you that sexuality and brain complexity have evolved together. Reproduction involving two individuals is so much more complicated than the division of a single cell that behavior such as this demanded a major evolutionary step in brain development. Sexuality is built into the brain. and the male and female brains are indeed different. This female rat was given a single injection of male hormone shortly after birth. That one shot was enough. She now has the brain of a male, and she will almost always act accordingly. If presented with a normal female in heat, she will show many of the male sex behavior patterns, even the characteristic licking of the genital area. We're just beginning to understand how the glands and the brain interact throughout life.
The brain directly controls the master gland lying beneath it, the pituitary. It tells the pituitary when to release special hormones which travel throughout the body, causing other glands to produce other hormones. The blood carries those hormones all over the body and to the brain, where they influence behavior. Some pituitary hormones encourage self-preservation. Thyroid hormone keeps body and brain active. Adrenal hormones serve in time of stress, while female sex hormones operate the menstrual cycle. One pituitary hormone makes the ovaries produce estrogen. That sex hormone induces the brain to release another pituitary hormone, causing ovulation. 2 weeks later, the woman menstruates, and the cycle starts all over again. Estrogen builds up to trigger the release of the ovulation hormone, and again, menstruation. This is the rhythm that is broken by the contraceptive pill, which basically misleads the brain.
Shortly before menstruation, a woman is 4 times more likely to commit a crime than at any other time. There is also, during this period, a marked irritability and depression. Now, the cause of these emotional states appears to be that at that period of time, there is a sudden shift in hormonal levels prior to the switchover to a new cycle.
This is the area of rat brain controlling the pituitary, the master gland that regulates the hormones of the body. The green fluorescence in the outer layer shows the chemical transmitter dopamine. And this is from the same area of a pregnant rat. And notice the absence of transmitter in the outer layer. We think that this is due to the fact that the brain is so busy inhibiting the pituitary to release eggs from the ovaries that it's using up its transmitter at a higher speed. And this general region of the brain, which so powerfully controls the chemistry of the body, is called the hypothalamus.
Our basic drives come to a focus in the hypothalamus, a region near the top of the brainstem no bigger than a thimble. Activity here can cause aggressiveness. The sexual drive starts here. When we're thirsty, it's this region that says so. Here, too, are the dieter's controls, switches for hunger and satisfaction. The brain also has its pleasure centers. In return for electrical stimulation here, laboratory animals will work until they drop. Yet the hypothalamus is only one cog in the complex machinery of emotion. Squirrel monkeys use a wide range of actions and calls as signals of emotion. This male is the ruler of his little colony. But he has a surprise coming today. Dr. Manfred Maris is going to challenge the dominant male's authority. This experiment is being done at the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich. Dr. Maris has remote control of the brain in another male monkey, who will be the challenger. The cap is a receiver, and beneath it, wires run deep into the monkey's brain. All is peaceful at present, and the subordinate male keeps his normal place. And here's the boss again, content in his authority. When the subordinate monkey receives a mild electrical stimulation in a chosen part of the brain, abnormal behavior will begin. Brain stimulation off. The German experimenters are seeking a better understanding of emotions and their outward signs by using remote control of the brain. To tell us why, the leader of the research team, Dr. Detlev Plug.
A single monkey is only half a monkey. Its normal life is shaped by interactions with its companions. In human life, too, communication with one another is the main factor. As a psychiatrist, I believe that the cause of mental illness is a distortion or even a breakdown of the communication system. But the human communication system is very elaborate, and we can't experiment with patients. That's why at a psychiatric institute we investigate the gestures and calls of these animals.
These calls can now be produced at will. Uwe Jürgens has mapped the regions of the squirrel monkey's brain involved in different calls. No other monkey has so large a range of sounds, and electrical stimulation can evoke them. The brain's being stimulated here, but in fact that same call can be evoked anywhere in these regions. It denotes general aggressiveness. Similarly, stimulation anywhere here will produce this call. It's a sign of high excitement. That's a threatening call. This one is probably used just to attract attention. Large, deep-lying areas of the brain operate in each emotional state. The calls simply communicate these states to other animals. Up to now, no animal could tell human beings exactly how it was feeling. The next goal in the Munich experiments is to find out more precisely how each call affects other monkeys. The squirrel monkey's calls are a powerful new tool for finding out how the brain produces emotion.
Like monkeys, when we humans express our emotions, we inevitably influence the actions of other people. Unlike monkeys, we can reflect on our emotions and channel them, which gives a special dignity to human life.
There they are, citizens of Montreal, going about their business efficiently and politely. How much more immune to emotional disturbance, don't you think, than a pack of wolves or a gang of monkeys? Appearances are misleading. Man is probably the most emotional animal of all.
A pioneer of the new psychology that links mental and physiological mechanisms to explain emotion is Chancellor of Montreal's McGill University, Dr. Donald Hebb.
Nobody would seriously suggest for a moment that the spider is capable of emotional disturbance. The rat may be capable of some fear, but that's about all. With the dog, we have something more complex. The dog is capable of jealousy, of grief for a missing master, and certainly of fear. But with the chimpanzee, we've got something that's very human. The chimpanzee that is teased in feeding may sulk for weeks, and shown a death mask like this may be utterly panic-stricken. Notice that progression. The price of intelligence is a more complex brain, more easily disturbed, more vulnerable to emotional disturbance. The temper tantrum of the human child is an example of pure, unadulterated emotion. He grows out of it, you say? If he does, I'm wrong. The theory I'm working with says that the human grown-up is twice as emotional as the 3-year-old. How does it concealed? Well, how long is it since you told that neighbor what you really think of her? How long is it since you handled a corpse? It seems to me that society is structured by human beings so as to protect them from the consequences of their great capacity for emotional disturbance.
Dr. Hebb, who was just talking to us, paid healthy students good wages simply to rest on a bed like this, with nothing to see or hear or touch. They were strangely affected lying here. They had hallucinations, sights of marching squirrels or parades of eyeglasses, sounds of a music box or church choir. For those who endured a few days, the world seemed distorted afterwards, and for a while, simple tests were difficult to do. Small wonder that solitary confinement is used in so-called brainwashing. For normal efficiency, human brains depend on a continuous inflow of information. Some need more than others, but we're all vulnerable to boredom on the one hand and to overexcitement on the other. Studying emotion in patients is not a proper matter for surgical experiment, as Dr. Plug declared. But 1 or 2 clinics elsewhere have put wires deep into human brains to produce emotional effects by electrical stimulation, as in those monkeys we saw. However these experiments strike you ethically, Such cases confirm that the emotional machines in human heads are like other animals, and hormones flowing in the blood influence our mood and conduct. So is man some kind of chemical robot? Should brain research make us scornful about human nature? Happily, as we're going to see, new discoveries restore the balance between mind and chemistry. But don't forget a much older token of human ability to master the outward signals of emotion, the art that every actor has to learn.
Take it off, it's hideous.
Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head.
Take it off!
Goosey, goosey gander, where do you wander? Upstairs and downstairs and in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man who wouldn't say his prayers. So I took him by the left leg and threw him down the stairs.
Take it off! Jake, it's not funny.
Yes, hold it there a minute. I think that bit can probably be tightened up quite a lot. There's a bit where the tension here is going out of it as you're doing the second part of Goosey Goosey Gander. What you want is not just a reaction to an executioner's mask. It's not grand guignol in that sense. But it's the feeling that this man is raping your soul, stealing your personality. So to get that in, I think, why not try a bit of the mirror game? See how it goes, yes? Close observation of each other. But him taking everything from you and mocking you with it, mocking you with yourself, so that he drives you in on yourself to the edge of a nightmare. That's really what one's after.
Please take it off.
Please take it off.
Jake, it's not funny. What are you going to do?
Go on.
Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes... Have you anything you wish to say before...
Before?
A cottage on the Essex coast...
My father.
...is dead.
Father?
Dead.
Don't put me in the gas mask. Don't put me in the gas mask.
The techniques of the yogis of India were recommended to actors by the famous teacher Stanislavski for mastering emotion. But back in New Delhi, Ramanand Yogi is mastering more than emotion. His brain is still very calm after 4 hours in the airtight box, yet he's brought his life almost to a standstill. The shaded area represents the theoretical minimum of oxygen the yogi's body needs to survive when completely at rest. In the first half hour, he managed with less. Then he settled at half. That's a level he reached in earlier tests. But after 3 hours, look, the air sampling shows him down at 1/4 of the so-called minimum. There's no mistake, because the next half-hourly measurement shows the same level. Now it's time for the next air sample. They check not only the oxygen used, but also the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the box. But already the team at the All India Institute has found that the yogi, strictly through mental control, can cut his oxygen requirements far below the theoretical minimum. Oxygen that's needed for the most basic routines that sustain and repair the body. So here's a case of mind over matter, a triumph of the human brain over chemistry and over the glands and internal organs, systems usually thought to be self-governing. It's like willing your hair to grow more slowly. Professor Anand is equally surprised by the yogi's continuing peace of mind, apparently undisturbed by the rising concentration of carbon dioxide in the box. In the Bhagavad Gita, holy book of the yogis, it is written, "As a blazing fire turns fuel to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge turn all actions into ashes." But
But you don't have to be a yogi to take some control of your body.
Just set your mind free, relax, breathe regularly, and when you hear the tone, that tone will mean that you're succeeding.
That's all I have to do?
That's all you have to do. Keep the tone on as much as possible.
Okay.
All right?
In a New York hospital, we're about to see something which, up till now, most doctors would have thought was quite impossible.
Oh, now start in recording.
This healthy volunteer is going to attempt to lower his own blood pressure simply by willing it.
Coming down. Good. Coming down. Wrong way. Better. Now you're coming down. Down. Good. You're keeping it on a long time. Very good. Excellent.
In charge of this experiment is a leader in modern experimental psychology, Dr. Neil Miller of the Rockefeller University.
Excellent. The best yet. You're way down.
Blood pressure is down by 16%. Conscious control of the body's inner workings? Few physicians thought it was possible. Dr. Miller has staked his reputation on the belief that it is.
So strong was this prejudice that I had extreme difficulty in getting even my own students to work on this problem. But in the end, we were able to show that the brain has more direct control over internal organs such as the heart, the kidneys, and the intestines than even those rare perceptive physicians had believed. I believe that my work lends additional support to that of Professor Anand. With rigorous experimental controls, we have shown that we can train animals to modify a number of internal functions. We hope that it may be possible to use the same training techniques to teach patients with high blood pressure to reduce that blood pressure. Since we are just starting this work, this remains a hope.
Dr. Miller speaks modestly. His work could mean a revolution in medicine when its full import sinks in. The implications for mental factors as causes of disease and perhaps also as cures are truly staggering. There's a broader conclusion, too. We've always been telling ourselves that our emotions are foolish and unruly, and it did seem as though the lower parts of the brain conspired with the body to keep emotion inferior to conscious reason and left human nature at the mercy of chemistry. All that's changed by what we've been seeing. The mind can overrule chemistry, even to the extent shown by the yogi cutting his oxygen needs. The brain connections thus confirmed should help to scotch the old idea that emotion is foolish while reason is wise. They're equal. In this age of H-bombs and napalm, should we bet on logic to save us or on love? So far, we've been dealing mainly with deep-lying mechanisms of the brain, including the brainstem with its switches of sleeping, waking, and dreaming, the cerebellum and what it shows about the machinery of memory, and central regions that organize our drives and emotion. But our powers of seeing, thinking, talking, and so on seem mainly to lie in the roof of the brain. After a brief pause for station identification, we'll be back to explore these higher parts of the machinery of the mind of man.
Is from a single brain cell concerned with vision. It lies in the back of the cat's head. The cell sometimes responds to, sometimes ignores the moving bar of light in front of the eyes. This particular cell, monitored by a microelectrode in the surface layer of the brain, reacts to a horizontal line in a precise area of the screen. Among the visual cells, there's an amazing specialization. The animal is under an anesthetic. We're at the Harvard Medical School in Boston. The microelectrode seeks out another cell in the visual region of the brain. At the projector is David Hubel from Canada. Torsten Wiesel from Sweden marks the screen as he listens to the cell. During 10 years of experimentation here in Boston, Hubel and Wiesel have uncovered the early stages in which the brain picks out features in the patterns of light and shade that fall on the eyes. First, lines and edges of a particular slope, then movements of lines. In this case, the cell responds to a sloping line moving in either direction. Every cell in the so-called visual cortex has its own special functions, and its functions are discoverable. In this part of the brain, mystery is giving way to detailed knowledge.
Shall we map it out?
Yeah. Okay. Taking the upper top. Yeah.
This cell turns out to respond to a bar moving one way, but not the other. But now, if Professor Hubel makes the line of light longer, the cell ignores it.
Nothing at all.
With this degree of specialization in feature detection, it's easy to understand why the brain needs so many millions of cells to operate.
Very good.
The eye itself begins the analysis of what we see. It's more than a camera, it's an outpost of the brain, and the information the eye sends back is already partly processed within the retina. Millions of sensitive detectors react to the light focused on them, but among them, master cells compare the signals from many nearby detectors and pick out bright spots or dark spots. It's basically news about spots that travels along the nerves towards the brain. The message is made clearer still at relay points where adjoining nerves interact. The signals may stop actions by one nerve and trigger another. Cells at the back of the brain review the information from many nerves, looking out for lines or edges of particular slopes or for movement. Each cell watches for one feature. Huge numbers of brain cells help to analyze the diamond. As the eyes wander, the image shifts on the retina, and quite different sets of brain cells take over. But some cells found by Hubel and Wiesel hold on to the features even if small movements occur. The brain's begun forming a stable internal impression of the diamond out of ever-changing signals from the eyes. But what the brain chooses to see depends on other factors, the effects of alcohol, for instance. A man's state of mind affects his skill in a visual task. In an experiment at Cambridge, England, a British sailor has been fed rum. Then he tracks a moving needle with the lever. Apart from the rum, there's the noise. Any light that shows, he must cancel without losing track. The sailor's being tested at the Applied Psychology Research Unit directed by Dr. Donald Broadbent.
This kind of experiment helps us to give practical advice on how to lay out the work in submarines or in factories, or on the kind of mistakes that you might make when you're driving a car, even if you've just had a little bit to drink. But in addition, this kind of experiment gives us general clues about the way the brain's working. In this sailor, most of the information which is reaching his eye, or his ears, or his nose, is literally escaping his attention. And stresses like noise or alcohol as well as emotion and other kinds of excitement, are narrowing his attention. His brain's made a bet, as it were, about what's going to happen next. So when that rare light comes on, he doesn't see it, or he hesitates. Now, attention is the bit of the machinery that decides each moment what it is you're going to notice, and therefore what it is you're going to do. None of us can take in all the time all the things that are striking our eyes or our ears. For instance, if you've been trying to make out what color my eyes are, then I'm afraid you may have missed some of the finer points of what I'm trying to say. And because of this kind of thing, therefore, there seems to be a sort of filter inside the head which protects the big machines right in the middle against being overloaded.
The brain sees what it chooses to see. But how does the chatter of cells in the back of the head become a recognized object? In this case, a turning box. You may see it suddenly turning the other way. Your brain makes instant decisions, right or wrong, about what it's seeing. And what about this object? You may see it snaking in a peculiar way, but it isn't really. It's just a piece of bent wire turning behind a screen. For Richard Gregory, a British experimenter, tests like these help to show that our brains make internal models of recognizable objects. This cube has lost some of its edges, but you may still be able to hold on to its shape as it turns. The idea of rectangular boxes is extremely familiar. But you've never met this shape before. You've no model of it in your head. Apparently, we don't see objects just as they are. Instead, our brains make abstract models of them. Nobody knows the precise machinery at this stage of perception, but we don't have to think it's a supernatural process. Even electronic machines can learn to recognize everyday objects. In Edinburgh University's Department of Machine Intelligence and Perception, this object tests the powers of a robot to pick out its special features and say what it is. A television camera is the robot's eye, but the real work of recognition is done by a computer in another room. 3 ingenious programs supply it with processes of perception like those which must occur in the human brain. The first step is analysis. The robot assesses the brightness at each point. The aim is to organize the scene into regions of light and shade. Where the scanning lines cross, the robot is exploring the light region inside the rim. A second program relates all the various features, rim and handle, for example. Finally, the computer searches its memory. It looks for abstract models that match the mathematical description of the object. This should be the last step in recognition. If it doesn't find a good match, the robot can always look again. It says a cup, and it took 11 minutes. A little slow-witted?
Something with the same number of regions, about.
Donald Mickey and his colleagues find it fairly difficult to give a computer abilities that come naturally to the human brain. But no one here doubts that, in principle, an electronic robot can form concepts and use them intelligently.
And anything which is that. Yeah, now the size of the total repertoire of possible objects is up to about 10, isn't it?
Yes, it's about 9 objects.
Spectacles, cup.
If the road to intelligent robots seems difficult and slow, it's as well to remember that many years go into the making of a full-fledged human being, too. In some respects, a baby's rather like a robot running on imperfect programs. Kirsten, at 4 weeks of age, doesn't like unsweetened lemon, that's clear. But the automatic sucking reflex is too strong for her at this stage of life. Anne, 14 weeks old, another piece of lemon. Joanna, 6 months. She's made progress, at least the lemon's self-administered. Rachel, 9 months. A sign that our mental powers spring from the tissues of the brain is the way they're switched in one by one as the wiring is completed during childhood. This small program for avoiding the sourness is complete.
12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Good. Now, have we both got the same?
Yes.
You've got 16 and I've got 16. Is that the same number?
Yes.
Good. Now, if I pour mine in here, who's got more now?
Me.
Why have you got more?
Because they're all up like that.
Yes.
Richard is a bright 5-year-old, but his brain's not quite mature enough to grasp that objects don't vanish or appear from nowhere.
Who's got most now? You had 16 and I had 16. Who's got most now?
Neither of us.
Neither of us. They're both the
same.
Both the same. Good. Now, supposing I put mine in here.
You've got more than me.
Why have I got more than you?
Which was from there to there and one from there to there.
Thank you very much.
He'll get that right when he's 8. But even at 8, a child's reasoning powers are imperfect. In this Manchester University experiment, Damien has to find out which of many points on the panel represents a hidden treasure. These lights give him clear hints about whether each move is good or bad, nearer, farther, same distance. Even so, at this age, a child will rely on feelings and hunches rather than on reason. The strategy, or lack of strategy, used in searching is a sign of the child's prevailing mental capacity. But in the end, Damien locates the right point.
Ah, splendid. You found the hidden treasure.
For John Cohn, the searching mind automatically tracked is fascinating to observe. Mental searches for words and ideas are closely related to these outward searches. There's a much more systematic search in progress. Shirley is 13. In mental capacity, she's just about fully mature.
Ah, splendid. You found the hidden treasure very quickly.
Покажи нос.
Touch your nose.
Покажи глаз.
Touch your eye.
Глаз, нос.
Eye and nose.
Глаз. Это нос, да? Да?
Mental powers that emerge so gradually in childhood may suddenly be lost if the brain is damaged. This man can take only one simple instruction at a time. We're in Moscow at the Burdenko Institute, one of the world's biggest brain clinics. An outstanding Soviet expert, Dr. Alexander Luria, tests a patient.
М, Р. Ба, па. Ба, па. Па, ба, па. Ба, па, па. Не так. Не так? Не хватает немного. Ну, как браться, не видно чисто. Па, ба, па, па.
Damage to specific areas of the brain causes predictable loss of mental powers. These tragic effects are one of the surest sources of information about how the brain is organized.
Париж. Париж. Ливерпуль.
This man was a detective in a Moscow suburb. He was saving a woman from being mugged when a blow injured a region of his brain that is involved in interpreting words. The damage has seriously affected his powers of speaking and writing. His ability to recognize and repeat music remain, however.
Вместе. Расцветали яблоки и груши, поплыли туманы над рекой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий, на берег крутой. Сейчас. Расцветали яблоки и груши.
He was getting the words from the professor.
Расцветали яблоки и груши. А дальше?
But can he do it alone, without words?
Ну, попробуй. Я возможно. Без слов тогда давай. Могу, давай, как следует. Та-дари, тара-дари, да-ра-да. Та-дари, тара-дари, да-ра. Та-тари, тара-дари, да-ра-да. Та-дара, тара-дари, да-ра.
The separation of speech and musical powers in the brain is well known. Another Professor Luria's patient, a Russian composer, Shabalin, wrote this work. He conceived it even after a stroke had left him unable to understand speech. Here was the damaged area. But understanding music occurs on the other unharmed side of the brain. Shostakovich called this composition of Shabalin's the brilliant work of a great master. Put the triangle beneath the square. That ought to be easy enough. But this man was an officer in the Red Army, and in one of the battles of 1943, he was shot in the head. He lost a part of the brain which supplies the ability to relate the positions of objects. Mental arithmetic and the understanding of complex sentences are also affected. The same brain mechanisms serve all these different functions.
Правильно, хорошо. И теперь третье, последнее.
Now he has to try and put the triangle above the square again.
Значит, треугольник. Треугольник уже надо, выше, значит.
Words like above and beneath, left and right, no longer have their obvious meanings for him. He now has to use tortuous reasoning to put the triangle above the square.
Значит, надо выше туда.
The wound also destroyed the soldier's normal writing ability, but by using a different substitute brain mechanism, he was still able to sign his name. With effort and courage, he built on that remaining mechanism. He's even been able to write a book, a long account of his struggle for his mind.
Many people I know talk about cosmic space. Our Earth is no more than a tiny particle in the infinite universe, and yet people don't think about that. They think and dream of flights to the nearer planets which circle around the sun. But the flight of bullets, shrapnel, shells, or bombs which splinter and fly into a man's head, poisoning and scorching his brain, crippling his memory, sight, hearing, consciousness, this is something people consider normal and easily dealt with. But is it? If so, then why am I sick? Why doesn't my memory function? Why have I not regained my sight? Why is there a constant noise in my aching head? Why can't I hear properly, or why can't I fully understand human speech? It is an appalling task to start again at the beginning and relearn the world which I lost when I was wounded, to piece it together again from tiny separate fragments into a single whole.
Would you say this woman in the painting was a beggar because she's stooping a little? You might if you'd been injured in the front of the brain. In fact, this Russian painting shows the unexpected return of an exile. To find out why some patients with brain injuries make apparently silly remarks about pictures, colleagues of Dr. Luria in Moscow have tracked people's eye movements. Much speeded up, here's how a normal person's gaze first wandered over this picture. Asked how old the people in the picture were, he studied their faces. But a patient with severe damage in the front of the brain moved his eyes aimlessly, whatever the question. Planning action and anticipating its effect seems to be the work of the frontal lobes of the brain, which are particularly big in human beings. Parts farther back have more specific executive tasks. Back here, vision, as we've seen. Hearing words. Control of movement. And this is the part concerned with relationships, which gave that wounded soldier so much trouble. In young children, some parts of the brain mature later than others do. A wise mother should know that the front of the brain isn't fully developed in a 2-year-old. Even if he understands her instructions, he may be physically incapable of obeying them. We saw examples of how the human mind emerges as the brain grows in childhood. It passes through critical stages, and it can be affected by upbringing. In a Massachusetts hospital caring for unwanted children, brain scientists found small babies lying in cots like this with nothing to look at. They asked permission to brighten up the visual world of the cots. Then the babies learn to coordinate hand and eye movements 7 weeks earlier than babies in the plain cots had done. But the worst blight on the brains of the world's children may be malnutrition before or after birth. International field work in Guatemala is confirming that severe malnutrition during infancy can impair mental powers, probably for life. The effects of poor feeding are likely to be worst when the brain is growing most rapidly. Very recent research has now established 2 times of rapid growth at around 5 months before birth, and again from 15 weeks before birth until more than a year after birth. So nutrition of the mother matters too. Several million infants each year suffer severe malnutrition. Hundreds of millions experience milder deprivation. The total loss of human brain power is incalculable. Now let's go back to that experiment in New Delhi. You'll remember we left the yogi deep in his trance in his airtight box, and now he's showing signs of disturbance.
Dr. China is on watch, and it's nearly 6 hours since Ramanand Yogi was sealed up. Just in the past half hour, the yogi's begun showing effects of the rising carbon dioxide in the box. The trance isn't as deep as it has been. Heart rate and breathing are faster and less regular. The next air sample is due now. The yogi's come out of his trance, and he wants fresh air, quickly.
ये क्या हो गया योगी जी?
ये बहुत दर्द है जी।
छोड़िए।
He seems to be in good condition, considering that at one stage in the experiment, his body was making do with only a quarter of the oxygen he was supposed to need. So that's that. The remarkable test we've been watching must help to change our basic attitudes to the interactions of mind and body. The yogi's self-control, now verified by the instruments of science, is a private kind of accomplishment. But does not all human achievement begin with inward dreams made public? The mind of man has taken charge of the planet that gave it birth, ruthlessly driving back the wilderness, settling in a kind of peace in vast communities, pooling the talents of 1 million brains. But the restless hunter still drives his limbs to unprecedented feats. Wherever his mind can lead him, he sets his footprint, and he fills his caves with instruments stalking the secrets of nature. He strives to save the individual human mind from oblivion, but he turns to faith and awe where comprehension fails. And with his brain-born skills of hand and eye, man seeks for beauty, calling it truth. Our special powers of language play an indispensable part in human accomplishments. Nothing is more challenging or difficult to explain than how the brain supplies those powers. These regions, all on the left side of the head, are involved in language. Measurements made recently at Boston University show there's a language lump here, a definite enlargement not found on the other side of the brain. But mapping these regions tells little about how we learn language and use it. Is the child's brain like a clean slate on which language is inscribed by a process of trial and reward? Dr. B.F. Skinner of Harvard University and the behaviorists think it's so. But they're challenged by those who say our powers of language must be largely inborn. That's why there's so much interest just now in how children learn to talk. Take the little matter of when you say the thing and when you say a thing. The rules are very complex indeed and depend on what you think the other person knows. No one dares tell children these rules. They just pick them up by about the age of 4.
Well, Julia, once there was a man who was a photographer. He took pictures of animals for a living.
In Harvard University's Department of Social Psychology, a research student tests Julia's mastery of A and
First
the.
thing he saw, there was a lion and a tiger having a fight. Now, who do you think won the fight?
The tiger.
Yeah, the tiger won the fight, and he gave a great roar to show how happy he was at winning. Well, he thought that was a very good picture. So he went trooping on through the jungle, and next, he saw a rabbit and a turtle. They were having a race. Who do you think won?
The rabbit.
The present controversy about language and the mind of man raises important issues about brain mechanisms and also about human self-esteem. A leading figure in this argument is just along the road from Harvard at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a distinguished theorist of grammar, Noam Chomsky.
A number of years ago, people were quite enthusiastic and hopeful about the possibilities of using computers to, for example, translate human languages and to construct computer programs that would be able to comprehend and understand languages. These hopes have been very largely abandoned for the short run at least. It's now recognized that the principles of human language are far too subtle and complex for present-day technology and understanding to encompass and express them precisely. And this is an interesting and important fact, because of course every young child of normal intelligence very rapidly acquires a complete and full knowledge of his language and uses it with perfection. And he does this on the basis of extremely poor data and often on the basis of no teaching or very little teaching. I believe myself that this fact leads us to the conclusion that the major properties of language structure are inherent to the human mind, that they're simply qualities of mind, and that the child brings these qualities of mind to bear when he learns language, and he must only then learn the particularities, the specific details that distinguish one language from another. And I think that this conclusion is supported by the research into the variety of languages. For example, here at MIT, we have work on the structure of English, on the structure of Australian bush languages. And I think it's fair to say that very similar universal properties appear in this wide range of languages, which must, I believe, be attributed to properties of mind. I also think that there's no evidence whatsoever that other animals, let's say apes, share these qualities. Furthermore, I don't think that we are led to the conclusion that there's anything mystical about this. No doubt someday physical properties of the brain will be discovered that account for these at the moment quite incomprehensible innate abilities. But this is far off, and I believe we therefore must be quite careful not to underestimate the originality and skill and the depth of the properties of mind that are revealed when a simple child uses an original sentence.
Remember we play a game with the cars all going down the hill?
Dr. Chomsky's work restores our sense of wonder about human powers, but whether his theories are right, only patient research will tell.
Let's get them all close to you.
I'm always tired too because my mother always wakes me up and say, "Uh-oh." That goes our way.
All right. I'm just trying to get this set up.
Bard is an autistic child. In autism, the natural powers of language sometimes fail, and children may act like deaf mutes, although there's nothing physically wrong. In these circumstances, Dr. Skinner's principle of trial and reward can help to break through the barriers. When Bard, who's 6½, came for treatment at the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich 12 months ago, he was completely speechless and unsociable.
Soft?
Peter Gottwald uses a conditioning technique developed in the United States and England to help Bard talk.
Good.
He rewards any progress with a pat and a spoonful of ice cream. The procedure is based on the methods used in training laboratory animals. An essential first step is to make eye contact.
Schau mich an. Gut, das ist gut. Bascha hier. Was ist das, Bart?
Nein.
Richtig. Gut. Was magst du haben? Gut.
Great skill and patience are needed, even in this seemingly simple routine.
Gut. Prima. Was ist das? Bart, schau hier. Was ist das?
Gut, das war gut. Was magst du haben?
A star pupil after 18 months training. When she was 8, Irena behaved like an infant, saying little and being easily upset. Now she's maturing socially and can use short sentences.
Was ist da? Das ist die Bettina.
The behaviorist technique has worked for these autistic children, but that doesn't prove that more normal children learn language by simple trial and error, or that there's no inborn basis for the development of language in human beings.
Ganz viele Leute sind da drauf. Come on, Sarah. Come on. Come on. Mm-hmm. Good.
Sarah is a student at the University of California at Santa Barbara. They're trying to teach her to reason with words. It's one of the current experiments in communicating with chimpanzees. Obviously, chimpanzees can't talk. But can Sarah read and write using magnetized characters that represent words and questions? Question mark. Apple is red. Question mark. Banana is yellow. Sarah knows 130 of these symbols. These experiments seem to challenge the belief that man alone among the animals can reason with words. Question mark. Apple is red. Question mark. Yellow. No, that's not right. That's better. Question mark. Banana is yellow. To answer these questions, Sarah's first supposed to remove the question marks. She has a choice of other symbols, 2 meaning yes, 2 meaning no. She's supposed to take the symbols meaning yes and put them at the head of each column. Sarah removes the question marks and looks for the right answer. But does the trainer unconsciously give her any hint?
Come on.
The psychologist in charge, David Premack, says he's guarded against that possibility, which always hangs over tests of this kind. Other experts are impressed, but still deny that chimpanzees can use language in any human sense. Nevertheless, like other experiments with apes, this one reopens the question of whether the powers of language are truly unique to man. But it is relatively certain that no ape has ever asked himself how stars are born or how atoms behave. At the California Institute of Technology, Richard Feynman, theoretical physicist and Nobel Prize winner, seeks the answers to questions like this in an ambitious creative exercise peculiar to the mind of man.
Sometimes I feel like an ape, trying to figure out how nature's going to behave, fooling around with all these symbols. I always thought about what it is that goes on when I think about these things, and I realize it's a big mix of pictures and symbols, and in my head is a kind of confusing mess. But the symbols are inventions of other people, which make our thinking about nature efficient. And so I have a great advantage over the apes because I have the experience of all the other individuals who've invented these things to help me to think. And I've invented some things too. There's a thing called the Feynman diagram that other people use. It helps them to analyze the way nature's going to behave. My father got me interested in all these things by telling me how wonderful nature was, teaching me how to think about things and what pleasure it is to look at something from a new point of view. But he couldn't ever know the terrible excitement of making a new discovery. You get so excited you can't calculate, you can't think anymore. And it isn't just that nature is wonderful, because if someone tells me the answer to a problem I'm working on, it's nowhere near as exciting as if I work it out myself. I suppose it's got something to do with a mystery. And that's the mystery of how it's possible to know something, at least for a little while, that nobody else in the world knows. And to know how nature's going to behave in a situation that's never been tried before. How is it possible? What have we got in our heads that make it possible for us to find such things out? And I suppose it's the mystery of that adds to the terrible excitement you get when you make a real discovery, which hasn't happened to me very often in my life. So I keep trying.
Whether it's concerned with universal laws or with the appearance of a hillside, the human imagination seems boundless. Knowing so little about the functions of the mind, what can we say about the brain mechanisms that can allow man to create a work of art? Marc Chagall is one of the great painters of our time, noted for his strange mixtures of the real and the fantastic. The imagination builds on basic functions of the brain. The machinery of vision, which makes mental models of objects, serves in imagining as well as in actual seeing. Genius is indeed close to the anguished inventiveness of madness, or the unreal flow of ideas when drugs interfere in the transmissions between brain cells. In matters of shapes and patterns, the right-hand side of the brain is particularly involved. The mechanism of recognition comes into play with a feeling of excitement and conviction as the painter recognizes the right idea. But what is right depends on the times. In the face of competition from photography, the imaginative powers of the painter are tested to the limit, in showing us sights never seen before. Chagall himself once said that if you can discern no single object, even mountains of color piled on a canvas won't necessarily make it seem right. In the greater realms of imagination and language, the maps of the brain become sketchy. Successes with more ordinary powers like moving and seeing may be putting brain research where astronomy was in Galileo's time, when man began saying the planets were not propelled by angels and our world might even be in orbit around the sun. At about the same time, the French philosopher Descartes kicked the mind of man right out of the physical universe. He declared that mind and matter could not interact, and so allowed the soul to be immortal. But his separation of mind and matter has endured with both the main forms of psychology of the 20th century. The psychoanalysts, followers of Freud, deal with mental events without reference to physical brain mechanisms. The behaviorists use the physiological conditioning methods of Pavlov and Skinner to study outward results of brain action without attempting to relate them to inner mental processes. But when we think of putting our mental world into orbit inside the skull, eminent spokesmen for these rival schools of thought united in their skepticism.
I do not agree with the argument of this program. We do not need to create a duplicate of the brain called a mind. We can deal with the brain in other ways. My name is Skinner, and I'm a behaviorist. As such, I study rats, pigeons, children, and adults, normal and psychotic. The behaviorist does not ignore consciousness, as is often said. He simply deals in other ways with the facts which are said to show that a person is conscious. In explaining these and other facts, he emphasizes what has happened to a person during his lifetime. Naturally, the brain plays an important role in bridging the gap between what has happened to a person and his current behavior. Eventually, the physiologist will tell us how the brain does this, but we cannot wait for him because we must get on with the analysis, and in particular, with applying it to the solution of problems in the world today.
This program is misconceived if you think you'll learn much of the human mind by looking at brain mechanisms. Knowing how a television set works tells you nothing about the content of the programs. My name is Maine, and I'm a psychoanalyst, and this means I have to switch on the set and listen. My colleagues and I listen hard to our patients and try to understand the depths of the mind in what we hear. I deal in concepts, unconscious concepts, such as envy, gratitude, joy, grief, revenge, and remorse. These are matters of mind, and they're no less important than molecules or brain cells. Indeed, in terms of man's daily experience, they're a great deal more important and more convincing. Today's emphasis on atomic sciences and methods and their mimicry by biology poses a needless threat to our humanity if it's to lead men away from their own inner awareness just because it can't be put under some microscope. Study of externals, animal behavior, ordinary human behavior, brain cells, and so on, have their own importance. But the study of man's inner experiences and their personal meanings for him is what psychoanalysis is about. It begins where this program leaves off.
I have spent a lifetime studying the working of the nervous system, but have not yet begun to understand how my brain gives me consciousness. In fact, all I know is what my mind gives me in perception and memory and imagination. By seeing, hearing, and touching, I come to know of a world of nature. And as a scientist, I try to understand that world, including even my own brain. The really interesting features associated with that world, light, color, sound, smell, form, pain, are not in the world at all, but come to my mind as interpretations of signals to my brain in a manner that is completely beyond any scientific comprehension. I believe that there is a fundamental mystery in my personal existence, transcending the biological account of the development of my body and my brain. That belief, of course, is in keeping with the religious concept of the soul and with its special creation by God.
For understanding man, the dreamy hunter, no method is uniquely right. Yet science is now leading us into the mazes of the brain for some of the answers. One successful pathfinder for this new approach to mental life, which we've followed in this program, is the Canadian Dr. Donald Hebb.
30 years ago, here in Montreal, I was faced with a great puzzle. I was studying some of those patients with large chunks of brain removed and could find nothing wrong with them. Nothing wrong with memory, nothing wrong with their intelligence, consciousness unimpaired, which was, indeed, a very great puzzle. In the years that followed, I developed what might be called, I think fairly, a crackpot theory, but that's had some support. It implied that thinking consists of the interaction between brain cells and nothing more, that consciousness, that intelligence is a function of the interaction of brain cells, that emotionality will increase as intelligence increases, that the more intelligent a person is, the more subject he is to emotion. It implied that man is a complex organism, complex beyond my imagining, complex beyond any words of mine, and all this with no element of the supernatural at all.
Perhaps a more generous view of human nature begins with wonder at the machinery that makes it. This evening, we've seen progress towards understanding how our personal systems of brain cells arouse themselves, watch, and learn. Consciousness certainly remains a mystery, but in that connection, there's one more state of the human mind to show you. It's the most extraordinary of all.
A few years ago, the life of this Los Angeles woman was in danger. She suffered from frequent severe epileptic seizures that stormed across her brain. A surgeon, Dr. Philip Vogel, decided on a treatment of last resort. He split the upper parts of her brain. The connections, which normally carry a continuous stream of information between the two big hemispheres of the brain, go by 3 thick cables of nerve fibers. The surgeon cut them. When this drastic treatment first came into use, surgeons were amazed to see no resulting disturbance of ordinary behavior in their patients. This patient now leads the normal life of a housewife. The operation left untouched the nerves that direct the incoming signals from the right side of the body into the left side of the brain and vice versa. Although the two sides of the brain are now separated, the eyes and other senses help in sharing information, and the hands still cooperate skillfully. No wonder surgeons first thought that splitting the brain had little effect. Only recently have careful psychological tests shown that the split brain operation leaves the mind in a very strange condition indeed. In fact, it creates 2 separate minds under the same skull. The split brain condition has nothing whatever to do with the so-called split personality of the insane. Instead, it gives new insight into normal human consciousness. This lady is quite sane in both her minds. Today, at the California Institute of Technology, our housewife is visiting the experimental psychologists. They've been studying the human split brain here since 1961, led by an outstanding brain scientist, Dr. Roger Sperry. He observes what happens when the housewife cannot see her hands.
Put your left hand through the screen. Okay, and I'm going to put a number in your hand now. And what I want you to do is signal the answer. So here's the first number. Can you tell me what that number was?
4.
Okay. Now let me give you another number.
The housewife feels with her left hand, which means the information goes to the right side of the brain. That right side doesn't control speech, but it can count and it can signal.
Can you tell me again what the number was?
6.
Okay, now let me give you another number.
Only the left side of the brain can talk, but it has no idea what the numbers are. It just guesses. Her left brain doesn't know what her left hand's feeling.
Can you tell me what it was?
5.
Nor is it just an inability to say the right thing. The sense of touch in the two hands is divided. As we'll now see, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Put your left hand through the screen. I'm going to put an object in your hand now. Feel it. And then I'm going to take it away. And I'll ask you to find it again. Okay? Okay, now see if you can find it. When you find it, hold it up.
The left hand and the right side of the brain know all about the cup.
Now I want you to find the same object with your right hand.
But the right hand and left side of the brain know nothing about the cup.
Okay. Now I'll put another object.
Left hand again. Ah, that was a giveaway. The other side of the brain may have heard the sound of the brush.
Try to find it with your right hand.
There's an auditory cue there.
Yes, she did hear it. Dr. Sperry believes that experiments like these have now revealed the chief mental consequences of the split brain operation.
Even after working with these patients for more than 8 years, I still continue to be impressed with the way this surgical division of the brain also divides the mind into two separate realms of conscious awareness. Neither mind right nor mind left in these conditions has any direct awareness of the existence of the other side, nor is either one aware of its own incompleteness. The mental capacities of the two hemispheres are distinctly different. The left one is the dominant, literate, talkative side of the brain, capable both of verbal reasoning and of difficult calculation. It also is the more aggressive hemisphere and is very much in charge of behavior. And this is the one that we meet in ordinary communication. Special tests are needed to make this left dominant hemisphere stand aside and allow us to uncover the minor right hemisphere.
This new test is designed to confirm that although the right side of the human brain is mute and unassuming, it's considerably better at dealing with patterns and shapes. This pickup will keep a check on eye movements because it's essential that each side of the brain sees only what it's supposed to see. This wire will detect any head movement.
Have on.
They're going to show the housewife faces out of this selection and ask her to identify them. But in fact, they've taken the two faces in the middle and cut them together like this. Which of the two faces will she identify? When the eyes gaze in a fixed direction, each eye will divide its information between the two sides of the brain. Whatever lies off to the right is seen on the left side of the brain and vice versa. So the mute left side of the housewife's brain will see only the little boy, the right side only the girl in spectacles. Neither side will know that there's more than one face.
We are going to show you a picture of a face. And after you saw it, point to one of the faces right here on the table with your right hand.
Okay, put your face up close and look steadily at the red spot. Keep your eyes steady.
That's the face the right brain saw. It's the one on the left here. The question was, which side of the brain would make the choice? The right side of the brain won because it's much better at recognizing faces. It guided the eyes to its target and the right hand followed its aim.
We are going to show you another face. Except that now we want you to describe it to us.
This is what she'll see. Only the left side of the brain can talk, and it should see only the old man.
Okay. Watch the red dot. Ready, keep steady there.
Seeing an old man's face with a beard.
Okay. Did you see him clearly?
Mm-hmm.
And did you remember anything else about him?
He had a hat on.
Had a hat on, that's right. And was nothing unusual?
No.
Nothing strange?
And a beard.
You said a beard.
It looked like he had a beard.
There's a lot of hairs.
Right.
Yes. He actually had a bushy mustache.
Maybe that's what it was.
For those of us in brain research who are beginning to think beyond behaviorism, the findings in these patients narrow down somewhat the search for that number one enigma, the nature and localization of the conscious mind. The results seem to pin down our conscious functions to those upper regions above the brain stem and the cerebellum. It looks now as if consciousness in man can be tied to the living, alert brain in action. I just can't agree with colleagues who insist that our conscious experience is only a mere passive byproduct of the work of the brain. My own view would make consciousness a real force in brain function, giving our thoughts, mental images, feelings, and so on a direct controlling influence in brain activity.
If Dr. Sperry is right, the conscious mind of man is brought back into the physical world. Its powers will be fully stretched if it's ever to understand itself. But this ambitious scientific enterprise is well begun, as all the discoveries we've sampled this evening show. The aim isn't to degrade mind to matter, but to upgrade the properties of matter to account for mind, and to tell how, from the dust and water of the earth, natural forces conjured a mental system capable of asking why it exists. This is David Prowett, NET, in London.